Things are definitely moving fast ahead of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's eviction from Royal Lodge on renovating his new home at Marsh Farm on the Sandringham Estate.
Those who once followed the drama surrounding Prince Andrew were stunned when reports surfaced of a shocking confrontation during an alleged eviction. Behind palace walls and royal titles, tensions reportedly erupted as Andrew protested, declaring, "You can't do this. I'm the Queen's son."
Let's talk royals. Well, last week it was dominated, wasn't it, about Prince Andrew? What didn't he know? Was he going to be losing his titles? Was he going to be ousted from his home? Well, it certainly looks like he is going to be leaving his 30-room mansion in Windsor, Royal Lodge.
What appeared to be a quiet property dispute quickly turned into a moment of public embarrassment and deep controversy. How did a royal residence become the center of such chaos? And what truly happened behind those guarded gates? Andrew's eviction from the Royal Lodge. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was reportedly forced to leave Royal Lodge in early 2002 and allegedly shouted, "I'm the Queen's second son, you can't do this to me." The Royal Lodge had been Prince Andrew's home since 2003. After the death of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, he secured a 75-year lease on the grand property and is said to have spent millions restoring and renovating it. For years, the house stood as a powerful symbol. No matter the scandals or public criticism, Andrew still had a place inside the royal world. These dramatic claims come from a former royal protection officer who once guarded the then Prince Andrew. Despite alleged threats and intimidation, the former bodyguard, Paul Page, says he chose to speak to police in the UK about what he witnessed during his time on duty. He also shared his account with 10 News Plus, describing events that he claims unfolded behind palace walls. The mansion sits inside Windsor Great Park, on land owned by the Crown Estate. For many observers, Royal Lodge represented security and status, proof that Andrew's royal ties remained intact. But earlier this month, everything changed. In the first days of February, reports emerged of removal vans arriving at Royal Lodge. According to sources, Andrew was quietly moved out in the middle of the night and driven away without public notice. He was relocated to the Sandringham Estate in Norfolk, a property privately owned by King Charles III. Insiders claim he resisted the move. They say he did not want to leave and even protested, allegedly invoking his late mother's status. One reported line, "I'm the Queen's second son," suggests he may have believed his birth rank still offered protection. But this time, it did not. Just over 2 weeks later, on February 19th, Andrew was arrested at Wood Farm, the same day he turned 66. Police detained him on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He was questioned for approximately 11 hours before being released under investigation. So far, he has not been charged. Investigations are ongoing. Searches were carried out at addresses in Berkshire and Norfolk, including Royal Lodge itself. Officers reportedly encouraged former staff and protection officers to come forward with any relevant information. One former officer described unusual arrangements from years past. He claimed they would receive calls from a footman saying a female guest would arrive at 19:30 hours, and that security should notify him upon her arrival so he could personally greet her. There were even jokes among staff about a revolving door in the bedroom. Some former personnel questioned whether unknown visitors had ever been properly vetted, raising concerns about potential foreign connections, though no such claims have been proven. Being released under investigation means the case remains open. Police will continue reviewing documents, interviewing witnesses, and assessing evidence. If they believe there is enough proof, the file will be sent to prosecutors, who will decide whether charges should be filed. That process can take weeks or even months, especially when official records and cross-border cooperation are involved. If charges are approved, Andrew would appear before a magistrate's court like any other suspect. If not, the case could eventually be closed with no further action. At this stage, the outcome remains uncertain. Meanwhile, Royal Lodge stands in limbo. No new tenant has been announced. Because it is part of the Crown estate and was recently searched by police, decisions about its future may take time. What is clear, however, is that Andrew no longer lives there, and that marks the end of a long, controversial era. He is now believed to be staying at Sandringham, where reports suggest his accommodation is privately funded by the king rather than supported through Crown estate arrangements. For a man who once appeared firmly rooted in royal privilege, the shift from Royal Lodge to a quieter corner of Sandringham signals more than just a change of address. So, what caused the tension among the palace staff? Is there internal conflict among them? Let's take a closer. Palace staff tensions. There have been strong reports that staff at Sandringham House were quietly told they did not have to personally serve Prince Andrew if they felt uneasy or uncomfortable doing so. According to insiders, several members of staff chose to step back. That decision alone speaks volumes. Some accounts describe deep unease behind closed doors, with whispers in corridors and a growing sense that Andrew had become increasingly isolated within royal circles. This situation is no longer just about headlines or a damaged public image. It is about something far more personal and revealing, whether the people who cook his meals, organize his diary, and manage his daily routine are even willing to work for him. If multiple staff members have refused, that signals a serious change in how he is viewed behind palace walls. The controversy also brings back questions about his past connections to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. A former protection officer recalled first noticing Maxwell coming into the palace in the early 2000s. Staff were reportedly instructed not to stop her when she arrived. She was allowed to walk straight through security and move freely. After that, she was said to be coming and going regularly, with what appeared to be the same level of access as close royal associates. Later, Maxwell introduced Epstein, giving him entry into elite royal and political circles, something critics would later describe as deeply troubling. Following the arrest, King Charles III released a short but firm statement through Buckingham Palace. He said he had learned of the news with the deepest concern and stressed that the matter would follow a full, fair, and proper legal process handled by the appropriate authorities. He made it clear that the family would offer full cooperation and that the law must take its course. There was no emotional defense, no suggestion of unfairness, just a controlled and disciplined message. He also stated he would not comment further. Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, did not issue separate statements, but it is understood they support the King's position. As for Sarah Ferguson, she was reportedly abroad around the time of the arrest and had been seen on a ski trip in Europe in recent weeks. Although she divorced Andrew in 1996, she had continued living at Royal Lodge with him for extended periods. That living arrangement is now effectively over. She has not made any public comment about the arrest. Their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, have also remained silent publicly. Reports suggest they are still in private contact with their father, but are focused on shielding their own children and staying out of the spotlight. Beatrice has 2 daughters, and Eugenie has 2 sons. Sources describe them as trying to process everything quietly while avoiding the media storm. There have even been reports that they were approached with offers for paid interviews or tell-all projects, which they are said to be carefully considering for the future. In the days before the arrest, there were sightings of family members traveling abroad, including trips to Florida and a ski resort in Switzerland. However, neither princess has made any public appearance connected to the arrest. Meanwhile, discussions have reportedly taken place within government circles about the possibility of removing Andrew from the line of succession. Does King Charles have the power to take away Andrew's royal titles? Or could it just be a gang-up? Let's examine it. Removal of Andrew's royal titles. On October 30th, 2025, Buckingham Palace released a statement that was brief, polite, and written in the usual formal tone of the monarchy. But behind those carefully chosen words was a decision so serious that it sent shockwaves around the world. Within minutes, news alerts lit up television screens, websites, and mobile phones across continents. Commentators interrupted live programs. Social media exploded. Though the message itself was calm and controlled, what it revealed marked one of the most dramatic turning points in modern royal history. The palace announced that His Majesty had officially begun the legal process to remove Prince Andrew's royal style, titles, and honors. He would no longer be addressed as Prince. He would no longer hold the title Duke. From that moment forward, he would simply be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, his family surname, and nothing more. It may have sounded like a small change to some, but inside royal tradition, titles are not decoration. They define rank, identity, and place in history. To remove them is not just symbolic, it is transformational. It redraws a person's position within the monarchy itself. The message could not have been clearer. Andrew's fall from grace was complete. The statement went on to address the situation at Royal Lodge, the grand residence in Windsor, where Andrew had lived for many years. The palace acknowledged that he had held a long-term lease on the property, which had legally protected his right to remain there. Until now. That protection, the statement explained, had ended. Formal notice had been served. He was required to surrender the lease and move to alternative private accommodation. For months, public pressure had been building. Many critics believed decisive action should have happened much earlier. Now, it finally had. And what made the statement even more striking was its wording. The removal of Andrew's titles was described as necessary, even though he continued to deny all allegations against him. That single word, necessary, carried enormous weight. It signaled that, regardless of denial or defense, the institution had reached its conclusion. Whether Andrew admitted wrongdoing or not, the consequences would remain. The monarchy was drawing a firm line. It was separating itself from him entirely. Perhaps the most revealing part of the announcement was a passage expressing that the king and queen cared deeply about victims and survivors of all forms of mistreatment. For a royal family that traditionally avoids directly commenting on controversial matters, this was unusually clear language. It quietly, but unmistakably signaled where their sympathies lay. In modern British royal history, stripping a family member of titles is almost unheard of. To find a similar moment, one must go back more than a century. In 1917, during the height of the First World War, Charles Edward, a grandson of Queen Victoria, lost his British titles. Charles Edward had become the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in Germany. When war broke out between Britain and Germany, he chose to support Germany, fighting against the country of his birth. His actions were seen as betrayal. As a result, George V stripped him of his British titles under the Titles Deprivation Act, 1917. The fact that Andrew's case was being compared to such a dramatic historical event showed just how serious the situation had become. These are measures reserved for extraordinary circumstances. According to the palace statement, Andrew was given at least 12 months to vacate Royal Lodge, meaning he had until October 2026 to leave. However, insiders suggested that Charles III hoped the move would happen much sooner. Easter 2026, roughly 6 months after notice was issued, was reportedly viewed as the preferred deadline. The message was subtle but firm. Legally, he had a year. Practically, patience was limited. And the consequences did not stop with Andrew. Sarah Ferguson, who had lived at Royal Lodge with him since 2008, also lost her courtesy title of Duchess of York once his dukedom was removed. Although they divorced in 1996, she had continued using the title for nearly 30 years. It had become deeply connected to her public image, her charitable work, and her personal brand. Overnight, that identity changed. Friends said she was deeply shaken by the decision. Reports suggested she leaned heavily on her daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, for emotional support during this painful period. To many observers, it seemed especially harsh. Sarah was losing her title not because of her own actions, but because of circumstances surrounding her former husband. However, Andrew has spent a lot of money on renovation. So, if Andrew were required to give up the property before his lease naturally ended, would he be compensated for it? Or would all the money he had spent on renovations and improvements simply disappear? Let's explore this in detail. Prince Andrew's chaotic departure from Royal Lodge. Behind the calm, carefully chosen words of Buckingham Palace, a storm was quietly raging. A storm of legal questions, financial stakes, and deep emotional tension. It was shaping up to be one of the most dramatic chapters the modern royal family had faced in decades. Prince Andrew had reportedly paid £1 million up front for the lease on Royal Lodge. Over the years, he was said to have poured millions more into renovating and maintaining the sprawling estate, turning it into a grand personal domain. The Crown Estate, the organization that manages royal properties, stepped in to carry out a thorough inspection of Royal Lodge. Their goal was twofold: to see the true condition of the property and to determine whether Andrew might be owed any compensation for leaving the home early. But the findings were far from what Andrew might have hoped. By late 2025, as moving vans began arriving at the gates of Royal Lodge, shocking details came to light. Inside, the mansion was far more chaotic than anyone had imagined. Multiple sources familiar with the property described Andrew as a hoarder, a person whose possessions had accumulated to astonishing levels over the years. What should have been a relatively simple move had become an agonizingly slow and complicated process. Insiders revealed that some rooms were stacked from floor to ceiling with documents, photographs, and countless personal items. Friends and aides spoke to reporters about the overwhelming clutter, explaining how the sheer volume of belongings made even basic packing feel nearly impossible. One source described the effort as a room-by-room excavation, comparing it to an archaeological dig. Workers had to painstakingly sift through decades of collected items, sorting and cataloging each one carefully. Another insider noted that even if Andrew had wanted to leave immediately, the sheer mass of possessions made it practically impossible. What King Charles may have imagined as a matter of weeks, or at most a couple of months, now seemed likely to stretch until Andrew's 66th birthday on February 19, 2026, or possibly even beyond. The practical decisions alone, deciding what to take, what to store, and what to discard, were consuming enormous amounts of time, energy, and careful thought, no matter the pressure applied. But this story wasn't just about logistics. Psychologists who spoke to the press suggested that hoarding often grows from trauma, loss, or major life changes. For Andrew, the shift from being a busy, high-profile working royal to spending most of his time at home after stepping back from official duties in 2019 had been profound. Immersing himself in decades' worth of photographs, letters, and memorabilia may have been his way of holding on to a sense of purpose, identity, and connection to the life he had lost. Most of these items weren't random clutter. They were reminders of his time in the Royal Navy, his public service, and key moments from his past. Surrounded by these personal treasures, Andrew could relive moments of achievement and significance that might otherwise have felt distant and forgotten. The practical challenges were immense. Andrew was moving to a property described by insiders as shoebox-sized compared to Royal Lodge. Almost all of his belongings would not fit, meaning he would have to rely on a storage unit for the overflow. This added another layer of difficult choices. Which items needed to be easily accessible, which could go into storage, and which should be discarded entirely. For someone who struggled to let go of possessions, each decision carried heavy emotional weight. Every photograph, letter, or document represented a memory, a victory, or a chapter of life that now seemed irretrievably far away. Sorting through it all was more than just a matter of packing. It was a confrontation with the reality that his life had fundamentally changed. When the Crown Estate completed its formal assessment, the results were disappointing. Despite Andrew's multi-million-pound investments over the years, the property had not been maintained to the standards required under the lease. In legal terms, the dilapidations, the natural wear and tear or damage that buildings accumulate over time, meant that any claim for compensation was unlikely to succeed. In short, the money Andrew had paid up front, combined with the fortune he had invested over decades, would probably leave him empty-handed. For Andrew, the emotional blow of leaving a home filled with decades of memories, combined with the financial loss of potentially millions in compensation, must have made this period one of the most difficult of his life. Where might Andrew be heading next? Does he have a choice? Let's take a closer look. Prince Andrew's new home. When the news finally broke about where Prince Andrew would be moving, it sent shockwaves through both royal fans and the wider public. The chosen property was Marsh Farm, tucked away in Wollerton, roughly 2 miles west of Sandringham House in Norfolk.
This is the big one. GB News can confirm that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has relocated to a property on the Sandringham estate belonging to His Majesty the...
For those less familiar with royal tradition, Sandringham is one of the family's private estates, a place where kings, queens, and princes have long retreated for Christmas and other holidays, far from the public eye. Marsh Farm itself was a humble working farm that had stood empty for several years. The previous tenant, the farmer who had lived there, had passed away, leaving the property neglected. Sources described it as run-down, dilapidated, and in serious need of repair. This was far from a move-in-ready home. It would require extensive renovations before anyone could live there comfortably, especially someone used to the life of a senior royal. The contrast between Marsh Farm and Andrew's former residence, Royal Lodge, could hardly have been more dramatic. Royal Lodge was a grand mansion, brimming with luxury at every turn. Marsh Farm, by comparison, was a modest farmhouse, a place that would force Andrew to drastically downsize his lifestyle. The difference wasn't just noticeable, it was genuinely startling. Those close to Andrew said he had little enthusiasm for Marsh Farm. He had reportedly hoped to move to Wood Farm, the former home of Prince Philip. Wood Farm was larger, closer to Sandringham House, and, while still smaller than Royal Lodge, would have offered a more dignified and comfortable living situation. But his request was denied. The official explanation revealed the underlying strategy. It was deemed inappropriate for Andrew to be so near the family during events like Christmas. Moving him to Marsh Farm, 2 miles away, seemed designed to keep him on royal grounds, but at a safe distance, a subtle form of isolation. A royal insider told reporters plainly that Marsh Farm was far smaller and far less lavish than Royal Lodge. Friends of Andrew added that he hadn't lived in such a compact space since leaving his Buckingham Palace apartment decades earlier, a time when he could roam the entire palace freely. By January 2026, work crews arrived at Marsh Farm to begin the extensive renovations needed to make it habitable. Reports described at least 6 workers braving heavy rain to install new security measures and carry out urgent repairs on the long-neglected property. One of the first priorities was securing the perimeter. The old rusted barbed wire fence was replaced with a 6-foot solid wall designed for privacy and protection. Modern security features followed. CCTV cameras and a full surveillance system were installed around the farm. Given Andrew's high-profile situation, these measures weren't optional, they were essential. Yet the property also presented practical headaches. Andrew was reportedly frustrated by the lack of proper garaging for his cars. Someone accustomed to grand facilities now faced no secure space for his vehicles, and it remained uncertain whether the renovations could fully solve this problem. Staffing posed another challenge. Marsh Farm was too small to accommodate live-in staff. Andrew, who had never run a household alone, now had to rely on a cleaner, groundsman, and cook from Sandringham, all visiting on a schedule rather than being constantly available. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliam suggested that this arrangement may have been a subtle way for King Charles to maintain control. Keeping Andrew on the estate while limiting his resources allowed indirect supervision without overt interference. While these practical difficulties were serious, they would soon be overshadowed by startling discoveries about environmental hazards lurking on the property, a new chapter of challenges waiting to unfold at Marsh Farm. What hidden dangers could be lurking at Marsh Farm? Are there surprises that await Andrew? Let's uncover them. Flood risk at Andrew's home. In January 2026, a revelation sent shockwaves through royal watchers, journalists, and insiders alike. It emerged that Marsh Farm, the property Prince Andrew was preparing to move into, was far from the comfortable, prestigious residence he had known before. Not only was it smaller and less luxurious than his previous home, but its location carried an unexpected and serious danger. Environmental studies had shown that the property sat squarely on a floodplain, a low-lying area prone to flooding during heavy rains or violent storms. For Andrew, this meant that his new home wasn't just a step down in comfort or status, it was a ticking time bomb, a place where disaster could strike without warning. In a country already facing increasingly unpredictable and extreme weather patterns, the threat was real, tangible, and immediate. The seriousness of the danger was confirmed by a flood risk assessment conducted in 2024 for Wollerton Barns, a property located just a short distance from Marsh Farm. The report painted a troubling picture. It revealed that the Environment Agency operated a flood warning system for local residents, a system designed to give people precious time to protect themselves and their belongings. In other words, flooding wasn't some remote possibility. It was a known, recognized risk for anyone living in that area. The assessment went even further, examining the factors that could turn risk into reality. One key worry centered on the Wollerton pumping station, a vital piece of infrastructure responsible for keeping floodwaters under control. The report warned that if this station failed, whether because of long-term wear and tear or a sudden loss of electricity, properties like Marsh Farm would be directly in danger. There was no backup system in place, no guaranteed secondary protection, aside from temporary emergency measures. Practically speaking, the safety of the property depended entirely on a single machine working perfectly and on emergency teams responding fast enough to prevent catastrophe. Residents were advised to sign up for flood alerts to receive early warnings, but even that provided only partial reassurance. For anyone moving into Marsh Farm, the danger was real and inescapable. Life there would hinge on machinery and human effort to avoid disaster. The timing of this news couldn't have been worse. At the very moment the flood risk became public, Britain was being battered by Storm Awen, a violent weather system bringing relentless rain and hurricane-force winds. The storm was so severe that King Charles made the extraordinary decision to close the children's play area at Sandringham, citing safety concerns. For onlookers, this storm served as a live demonstration of the extreme weather that could easily threaten Marsh Farm. Royal commentators noted with alarm that Storm Awen offered a glimpse of what Andrew's day-to-day life might look like in practice. The fear of rising waters, the shrill wail of emergency sirens, the constant anxiety over whether machines and people could prevent catastrophe. It wasn't hard to imagine a worse scenario, an even fiercer storm hitting Marsh Farm while Andrew lived there, forcing the evacuation of a former senior royal. A nightmare for him personally, and a potential public relations disaster for the monarchy. These revelations about flooding quickly sparked broader questions about why Marsh Farm had been chosen in the first place. Some experts and commentators speculated that the decision may not have been accidental. Picking a property that was smaller, less comfortable, and riddled with problems could have been intentional. Perhaps the king and his advisors wanted Andrew to experience limitations. Flooding wasn't the only complication. Security quickly became a pressing concern. In an extraordinary move, authorities expanded Sandringham's no-fly zone to include Marsh Farm. This measure prevented drones from flying over, photographing, or surveilling the property, limiting both media intrusion and potential security threats. So, what do you think about Prince Andrew being suddenly meltdown during the eviction? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.